What's up, everybody? My name is Scott Paddock, and today we are going to talk about voice leading. If this is your first time watching one of my videos or you've been around for a little while, I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit the subscribe button, give me a thumbs up, and leave me a comment below. Piano players and guitar players live in the world of voice leading. All voice leading means is the way you move from one chord to the next chord. It's just how you move from one chord to the next chord. As single note players, like saxophone players, we think about voice leading when it comes to playing an improvisation solo. So how we're going to improvise from one chord leading into the next chord. That's how we think of voice leading. Now, there are all different kinds of crazy concepts when it comes to voice leading, but if you start off with just these three, you're going to be well on your way to having good voice leading and understanding what the concept means. Let's start off with a really common chord progression, which is a 1-7 chord going to a 4-7 chord. We're going to do this in the key of G or a B flat concert, G on my alto sax. So that would be a G7 chord going to a C7 chord. So if we line these notes up next to each other, what we need to do when we're talking about voice leading is figure out how to get from the first chord, the G7, which has G, B, D, and F in it, to the second chord, which has C, E, G, and B flat. So your first step to good voice leading is move to the closest note possible. So in the G7 chord, we have a G. So if we look at the C7 chord, we can see that the G in the C7 chord is the closest note possible. So if we're going to follow this first rule, moving to the closest note possible, we would just play from the G to the G as we switched from the G7 chord to the C7 chord. That could also include just holding that note. So if we look at the B in the G7 chord, so the third, we can look and see that the closest note to the B is the C, which is up a half a step, or the B flat, which is down a half step. So you have two options. When we get to the second rule, you'll understand which option might be a little bit better. But to start off, you just want to see which notes are the closest. So if we take a look at the 5 in the G7 chord, that is D. So we could go up a whole step to an E or down a whole step to a C. And if we take a look at the 7th, which is the F natural, we can see that the closest note is an E. So we're going to go down a half step to the E. So if we follow this rule, when we voice lead from one chord to the next, we are moving by the smallest amount possible. Now, this is a really effective way to go from one chord to the next, but take a listen to what happens when I do a play-along example over a G blues progression. If we are going from G to C, the closest note would be a G, and then C to G would still be a G. So for our first 8 measures, all I would do is play a G. That is not giving us very much information at all. Then for the D7, the closest note would be an F sharp, and then for the C7, back to the G, then for the G7, staying on the G, and then the D7, back to an F sharp. So take a listen to what that sounds like. Now, I'm using good voice leading because I am moving to the closest note possible, but it doesn't sound interesting at all. And that is because we need the second rule. The second rule is give as much information about the chord as possible. So if we just play that G throughout, we're not really giving much information about the chord. So to do that, we need to talk about the chord tones and what they are telling us. So you would think that the root would be the most important note, but when you're improvising, the root is not the most important note because a lot of other people are already playing it. So the bass player is playing the root, and there's a good chance that the chord player is playing the root too. So the root isn't going to give us a lot of new information because it's already being played. Now, if we take a look at the third, which in the case of the G7 is a B, that tells us the quality, whether it's major or minor. So the third is really important because it is telling us the quality of the chord. And if we take a look at the D, which is the 5th is a filler note. It's not important at all. That doesn't mean you'll never play it. It's just not that important of a note when you're trying to give as much information about a note as possible. And the seventh tells us what I call the flavor of the note. So it tells us whether it's a major seventh or a lowered seventh. So if you want a lot of information about a chord, you want to play the third, which tells you the quality, or the seventh, which tells you the flavor. Now, if you take a look at these two chords, and we have the G7, we have the B as the third, and the closest note in the next chord, which is the C7, is a B flat. So if we move from that B to the B flat, that is moving from a third, which is really important, and to the seventh, which is also really important, and we're moving by a half step. So even though there is a G and a G in both of these chords, if we do the third to the seventh, we're going to tell the quality and the flavor of the two chords, and you're going to get a lot more information. Now, if you take a look at the seventh of G, which is F, and you move the F into the E for your voice leading, again, you're going from a seventh to a third, and you're doing it by a half step. So that is giving you a whole bunch of information. So your first rule is move to the smallest interval possible, but your second rule is do that while giving as much information about the chords as possible. So to do that, we want to use our thirds and sevenths whenever we can do that. So take a listen to me playing through the blues progression one more time, and this time I'm going to start on the B natural, and I'm going to go to the B flat for the C7. And you're going to hear that you can tell what's going on in the chords by me using this type of voice leading. So I'm going to go from the B to the B flat. When I bring out the half step between the thirds and the sevenths, you can hear a lot more about what's going on in the chords as opposed to just playing that G, which is a mutual note throughout most of the chord progression. So you want to move by the smallest interval possible, but bring out as much information in each chord as possible. If you're interested in learning a lot more about how chords are related to each other, I'd like to invite you to check out the Scott Paddock Sax School. In every improv song, I talk about the chords, how they're related, how you should move between them, what the chord tones are, what the scales are that go along with them. So if you're interested in diving a lot deeper into this topic, check out the Scott Paddock Sax School. There will be a link in the description. And the third thing that you want to think about when it comes to good voice leading is the way you move between the two chords. So I can go from the B to the B flat in a line. So when B, G, A, B, G, A, B, B flat, directly from the B to the B flat. When I'm doing that, I am going from the and to 4 into beat 1 with my voice leading by a half step, going from the third to the seventh. It sounds pretty crazy and it sounds a little complex, but the more you work on it, the easier that kind of stuff becomes. So the first way to think about voice leading is connecting your improvisation lines, going over the bar line by moving from your third to your seventh, or your seventh to your third, or a voice leading note that is close. So that is a more literal way of thinking about voice leading, but another thing that you can do is just bring out the voice leading note as your strong note. So in this case, the B and the B flat don't necessarily have to be right next to each other, but you're going to hear the B as my strong note when I'm playing the G7, and the B flat as my strong note when I'm playing the C7. So even though the notes aren't right next to each other, they're going to sound like the voice leading notes because I'm bringing them out. That song might sound familiar. That is Tenor Madness, and that song is based on voice leading between the B and the B flat, or the third and the seventh. So the third and seventh aren't right next to each other, but you can hear that they're the strong notes in each chord and the way I'm playing them in the solo. So you can voice lead by bringing out the strong note, or you can voice lead by connecting the two notes next to each other in an improvisation line. so you can hear me leading into those chords by a half step. So there are 3 things to think about when it comes to voice leading. First, move as little as possible. Second, give as much information as possible. And third, you can use your voice leading by actually connecting the 2 voice leading notes, or you can bring those notes out as your goal notes or your strong notes so that you hear the note that you're trying to voice lead with as your strong note in each chord. And that's your intro to voice leading. And it's a pretty easy concept, but it can get really difficult when you're talking about some more complex theories and concepts behind voice leading. Now here is a great way to practice your voice leading. Pick a jazz standard, put on a backing track on iReal Pro, pick a chord tone, and try to apply the rules and see what happens. As you do this, the more you do it, the easier it's going to be for you to see and hear the way these chords move by using your voice leading. I'm going to do this over the jazz standard on Green Dolphin Street, and the first time I do it, I'm going to move by the smallest intervals as possible. So I'm going to start on my A, and you are going to hear a whole bunch of A's. That was a whole lot of A's, and it didn't really tell you hardly anything about the chords that are going on. So I'm going to do this exercise one more time, and this time I'm going to start on the 7th, which over the A major 7 would be a G sharp. And this time I'm going to move to the closest note possible while trying to bring out as much information as possible. And when I do this, you're going to hear a whole lot of movement in the voice leading and a lot of information about the chord. As you can hear, when I started on the 7th and I worked my way down by the closest interval possible, you can hear all kinds of information about the chords. So a really great way to practice voice leading is to do exactly what I just did. Start on the 1, work your way around the chords, then start on the 3, work your way around the chords, start on the 5, work your way around the chords, and then start on the 7 and work your way around the chords. As you do that, you're going to start to hear the notes and the chord tones that give you the most information, and the majority of the time those are either going to be the 3rds or the 7ths. But as you could hear as I did that voice leading exercise, I did play some 5ths and I did play some roots. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. If you now have a basic understanding of voice leading, I would really appreciate it if you give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and share it with your friends. Thanks a lot.